let's get started then. So, just a quick note on closed captions for this session. So closed captions are available if you'd like them. The Zoom toolbar has this available. So if you hit the closed caption button there, if it's not available, you might need to use the more icon and hit on show subtitles. We've also got live transcript. So again, in the same area, you can choose view live transcript if you'd like that. And this webinar is going to be recorded. So it will be shared out in a few days' time, and that will be fully subtitled, and that will be available on the Lumar YouTube channel. So without further ado, my name is Matt Ford. I'm a product manager at Lumar, and I've been working in the web technology and analytics space for nearly 6 years now. And most recently, I've led the development of our own accessibility testing functionality in the Lumar platform. And today, for this webinar about fixing and preventing common website accessibility issues, I'm joined by Paul Morris and Clyde Valentine. So I will let them introduce themselves. Clyde, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely can. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending. My name is Clyde Valentine. I head growth for QualityLogic, and our team specializes in accessibility testing, training, consulting, remediation guidance, that sort of thing. So that's definitely our focus and how we get into the accessibility space. And then I work with a lot of our clients on their accessibility practices as well. And Paul, I'll throw it to you for a quick intro as well.
Yeah, my name's Paul Morris. I'm the Director of Engineering for QualityLogic.
We may have lost Paul on that.
We just lost Paul.
Yes, that's how these things can go. I will give him a quick nudge, and we'll see if we can get him back in here. But he is our Director of Engineering and Accessibility Services, so he does lead that for us, and also comes from the perspective of a screen reader user as well. He's blind, so has obviously a direct perspective into accessibility. So that is Paul.
Thanks, Clyde. Well, we figure out getting Paul back online. I'll carry on with the agenda. So what we're going to run through today in the session, we'll quickly run through some housekeeping stuff. But we'll be talking about when we talk about digital accessibility, website accessibility. What do we mean by that? What do we mean when we talk about that? And then a discussion around what are the challenges around website accessibility, some of the common issues that you might run into. Then some practical strategies. So when you're actually approaching solving your website accessibility issues, what are some strategies that you can use to approach that? And finally, once you've made the changes, you fix those issues, what's the impact of that to the end user? And we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So please add any questions you have as we go along. So just quick things on housekeeping then. As I mentioned, Q&A. We have the Q&A box as part of the Zoom panel. Please do add in any questions as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end. If you can't figure out the Q&A section of Zoom, I've struggled with Zoom myself, so just stick it in the chat and someone at our end can figure it out, get it to the right place. At the end of the session, we'll have a very quick feedback survey, which just helps us understand how useful the content of this was and helps inform us on future topics that we should cover. So it'd be much appreciated if you fill that in. And as I mentioned, this is recorded and it will be available in a few days on our YouTube channel. So as we go through the webinar, we're going to have a couple of polls come up, and we'll kick things off with the first poll question, which is, does your organization have a formal accessibility initiative? So you should hopefully see the poll come up. I think we've managed to get Paul back in.
I hope so.
There we go.
Welcome back.
Right, so the poll results are in. We've got 42% yes, 38% no, 21% don't know. So we are just on the edge. Majority either don't have an initiative or don't know, but a good amount actually do have formal accessibility initiative, which is great to see. So I'll pass over to Clyde then to talk about what is accessibility. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Matt. We can flip over to the first slide, but yeah, so I mean, what is digital accessibility? I mean, there are a number of ways that digital accessibility can be defined or thought about, but for our purposes, I mean, I'll describe it as the inclusive practice of ensuring everyone can access and interact with digital content and information technology. I say inclusive in everyone to consider a wide range of life situations, be that individuals with vision impairment or motor control limitations, our aging population, and more. I say access and interact because it's both about access and also the meaningful engagement or use. I say digital content and information technology because it's broad. It's about software, web browsers, web content, assistive technology, really everything that we use in the digital world. And then I say practice because, you know, at least not consistently or effectively, it doesn't happen by accident. It takes deliberate intent to build with accessibility in mind. So digital accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring everyone can access and interact with digital content and information technology. We can flip over to the next slide. Speaking as well of like different life situations, there are many types of limitations that people can experience. These include limitations of vision, such as blindness or color blindness, hearing, such as being hard of hearing, learning, cognitive or neurological, such as dyslexia or like ADHD, physical and motor control like cerebral palsy, aging related like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So like there are a whole range of life experiences that people can, you know, that people can have. And so it's important to keep that in mind from an accessibility point of view. We can flip over to the next slide. These are going to be very quick slides, by the way, but as well, thinking about these different limitations that people experience, you know, people will use different assistive technologies or can use to support them. And so, you know, assistive technology is really any technology that is used to maintain, increase, or improve functional capabilities. There are many different types. I mean, in the physical world, at least, the things that people think about commonly are like crutches or a wheelchair as assistive technology, because that's really supporting an individual with mobility. In the digital world, we have screen readers, zoom magnification software, closed captions, speech to text, and so on. There are like a lot of different types of assistive technology. We can flip to the next slide. It's also worth considering that limitations may be permanent, temporary, or situational, as may be somebody's use of assistive technology. So if somebody experiences a degenerative eye condition and will experience vision impairment for the remainder of their life, that would be permanent. If someone has cataract surgery and they're not able to use their eyes for the recovery period, that would be temporary. If somebody is driving and can't look at their phone, or they're in a bright room and there's screen glare, that would be more of like a situational limitation. So when you think about accessibility, what you're really doing is building for a wide range of people and different use cases. We'll flip to the last slide here. And then the last thing that just in the topic of, you know, what is digital accessibility, the last thing that I think is important to touch on before we get into the common challenges is I like to highlight different perspectives on limitations. Now, I tend not to use the word disability, and while I won't get into the philosophical underpinnings on this webinar, and everybody has a different take, and that is completely okay, I will use it here just to describe the models, because that's the way they're commonly referred to and used. So there's the medical model of disability and there's the social model of disability. The medical model of disability views an individual as broken because of some limitation that they have, and it's viewed as more of like a personal, like inherent defect that needs to be corrected. And then the social model of disability views an individual as limited because of the way society is built or because of the environment. If an individual, who uses a wheelchair has access to a wheelchair ramp, are they limited? Well, the answer is no, because they still have their mobility. They can still get to where they need to go. And so the thing that I always encourage is apply that thinking to, the building and maintaining of websites. A person is limited only by our ability to make our website and our digital properties accessible. Now, there are many compelling reasons to invest in accessibility. I mean, it's the right thing to do, but there's also a business case and legal compliance and branding. And, that's a topic for a different day, but it is our responsibility to build accessibly and inclusively. On that particular note, and that being the reason why we're all here today, I will go ahead and hand it over to Paul to talk about some of those common challenges when tackling that very topic. So Paul, I will throw it over to you.
Yeah, so I want to talk about common issues. And the fact is that there really aren't that many common issues when we're designing for accessibility. So if we think about web design or mobile design, due to the flexibility of the frameworks, just take HTML, there's a limitless way of writing HTML. And now that we've got these cool front-end systems like React or Vue or Angular, there's even different ways to generate that HTML. So what that does is it provides a limitless opportunity to introduce accessibility issues. So that's something whereby we have to give that consideration whenever we're building the assistive technology that people use. They're playing catch up to everything. So if we consider that, there's a limitless way to introduce accessibility issues, there's a limitless way that the assistive technology has to try to keep up to cope with those potential capabilities. So our goal when we're designing for accessibility is to shoot for fully conformant HTML. So what do I mean by that? There are various HTML standards out there, but if we are truly conformant and we've used HTML to the very core depths of what HTML should be, the assistive technology has the best opportunity to work with, with the website. So if we consider JavaScript, for example, JavaScript is yet another layer which we can put on top of HTML to introduce potentially more issues. We have to give consideration to how much we're going to try to make a website act like an application. So that's the cool thing to do right now. We consider all of even the social media apps that we use. They've got buttons, they're very app-like. We have to give consideration to whether or not by enabling that cool feature, we're making it accessible. So one of the ways we deal with this is a technology called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Application. That is a standard that was added into HTML so that we could enable assistive technologies to interact better. With that said, there is a golden rule with ARIA, and this may amuse some of you. The first rule of ARIA is to not use ARIA, and I'll give you a good reason why. As we're doing development and we're introducing ARIA capability, there is a temptation to, over source our application with just a ton of ARIA capabilities. That slows down assistive technology. It can confuse the assistive technology. So when we're using this awesome capability, we have to use it with real good judgment so that we're just not adding too much in, because too much of a good thing is just as bad. I saw one statistic that said 17% of applications where ARIA have been richly introduced have more issues than those which have no ARIA at all. One of the basic concepts there is a lot of the features in ARIA are things that HTML can do natively. So there's, for example, ARIA label by. Those are capabilities so that things work correctly and read correctly. But there are HTML capabilities like labels, like alt tags, like names. Those are things which automatically will go ahead and make it work correctly without having to use ARIA. Another temptation is to use ARIA roles, such as something like give something a role of button. Well, there's the HTML tag for buttons as well. Why put in a role to make something look like a button if it isn't, when you can just add the HTML to make something into a button? So I now want to touch on perceivable. In an accessibility world, think about your websites or your mobile apps and strip out all styling, all colors, all layout, and just make it into a linear progression that starts at top left and goes to bottom right. And that's how people perceive a website with assistive technology. So there's no concept of left and right. There's no concept of anything other than the first element in the DOM through to the last element in the DOM. That's how assistive technology natively interact with a website. So that's where we can use things like landmark regions, where we can actually give some stylistic feedback to assistive technology. For example, we can add in tags for nav bars, right? So that a nav bar is identified to a person. We could even decorate that nav bar to say that it's on the left side of a screen when the assistive technology lands on it. Now people start having a mental image of what that might mean from a layout perspective. So there's a lot we can do to improve the perception of the individual interacting with something, even if, for example, they can't see it. So that's something that we really need to give consideration to. I would say that, with that said, and I led it out by saying there are no common issues, there is actually one area which you could consider somewhat common, and that is the concept of color contrasts. I think everybody that has ever tried to build a website has a certain concept of branding, of how they want something to look. One of the problems with how something should look is that people, if they have color blindness issues, if they have any kind of vision issues, they're not going to get that same benefit of branding. So what we have to consider is how to style a website with sensible use of branding, but not having it where people are trying to interact with content. So I'll give a few examples of where people can go wrong on this. They've got their color styling and they're going to layer some text on top of that styling. If it's insufficient on the contrast ratio, and these are defined in a WCAG, then people are going to struggle to read it. Similarly, one of the temptations that people often have is maybe if they've got a really busy graphic and they're going to layer some text over the top of that graphic, well, there's two things that can go on there. There may be a contrast issue, but there's also a usability issue. People that have vision issues often have, in a way, an ability to be distracted by other things. So they're trying to read some text on top of a very busy graphical image in the background. They may be focusing on that background image to the extent that they can't actually read the text, even if it's in the right contrast ratio. So that's where we have to give more consideration to usability. A lot of times what we're doing is we're styling things because we're after a particular look and feel, but we have to consider our audience and, to embrace people. There's an element of balance here that we really have to achieve, where people are going to be able to interact and that we're not blocking somebody from enjoying what could be an awesome experience for them if they could just get past some of these limitations. So those are the topics I wanted to cover very briefly. So Matt, I think it's back to you at this point.
Thanks, Paul. We've actually just had a question come through the chat, which is ARIA like an accessibility widget? Paul, do you mind just explaining quickly what ARIA is?
Yeah, absolutely. Consider it as markup. Much like HTML, you've got all of the basic tags that you can use to create nodes. Well, these are markup that exist inside those tags. So, for example, let's say that you've got a div tag and you're going to give it an ARIA label. That will then allow that ARIA label to be read, describing what that div tag might represent. Possibly you could also, even though we don't recommend it, you could add a role to that div element of, a div role equals button. And that means that the assistive technology, when it interacts with that div element, it's going to believe it's a button and it's going to report that it's a button to the user, which in turn then allows that user to really think that they should interact with it by using a click mechanism with their assistive technology. It's not best practice, right? It would be better practice to use a button rather than make somebody believe that a div is a button. But that often happens. And sometimes a lot of people are trying to bring in that functionality. And that's where this technology can come in. So it's not like a widget. Think about websites where you see tabs. Those aren't native elements for the HTML concept. We have to communicate those using something like ARIA so that the tab is identified by the assistive technology as a tab. I think that should probably address that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Tara. Hopefully that answers your question. So in this next section, I'll talk about some of the practical strategies you can use in approaching the accessibility of your site. But first, we've got another quick poll. Is it clear who is responsible for accessibility in your organization? So just a reminder as well, to drop any questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get them at the end. So is it clear who's responsible for accessibility? The answers are in, and the majority is no. We see this quite often, but it's not always very clear who exactly is responsible or also accountable for accessibility within the wider org. So that really takes me into the first point on the first couple of points on this kind of a quick checklist for getting your approach right. So when you're starting to look at accessibility, first thing you need to do really is align your organization. So have a shared goal, have a shared target of where you're trying to get to, and just make that a clear policy within the company. So depending on where you're aiming and why, maybe it's for complying with specific regulation, maybe it's a company-wide initiative to reach a certain standard for just usability. Define what that is. Maybe it's WCAG 2.1 AA. That's where you're aiming for, and just have that as your clear standard that the organization is aligned and can get behind, and know where you're trying to get to. Then after that is this responsibility question. So there are loads of people that touch on accessibility practice, whether it's content developers, accessibility specialists, user experience. But for this to be successful as an initiative, you really need someone to have formal responsibility and to have accountability. Otherwise, things can get confused, things can drop off, and progress won't be as clear or as streamlined unless you've got that one person that's the driving force, reminding everyone of this initiative. So once you've got those two things laid out, it's really a case of equipping the team. So web accessibility is not necessarily widely known about. It's not always top of mind. It's definitely not well understood. And it can get quite technical, as you've seen with like the ARIA talk and color contrast and things like that. So you really need to ensure that your team has the right resources to be successful. So that's including training. So just basic internal training, ensuring that everybody has the information to know how to become accessible, what to think about. The right tools. So you have the right tools to get the job done, to do your testing, to audit your site. And also, if you don't have an internal specialist, it's worth thinking about like expert support. So having that helping hand to ensure that you are doing things properly in the right way. So once you've equipped your team, think about timing. So when is a good time to start working on accessibility? I guess the right answer is that any time is a good time, but some times are probably better times than others. So some of the common times within a website development that are a good opportunity to think about accessibility would be you're developing a new site, for example. So if you know a new site is on the horizon, there's really no excuse for a brand new site to not be accessible at this point. So a great point to start thinking about building accessibility into the design of the new site. Maybe you're going for a re-platform. Again, there's going to be a lot of development involved in that process, and it's a perfect opportunity to start looking at the issues that do exist and see, can you easily address those as part of the re-platform? And also rebranding. So when we think about color contrast, as Paul mentioned, rebranding often brings new colors with it. And you can't always assume that people that are thinking about the rebranding are thinking from an accessible point of view. So it's best to raise a voice there and ensure that you don't end up with primary colors in your new branding that you can't actually use because they're not compliant with color contrast guidelines, for example. So think about those kind of big touch points. Maybe if you've got something on the horizon that you'll know is coming, but maybe it's 6 months away. You can always look at what are some quick wins in the short term that you can start working on up until you get to that bigger touch point. So finally, measuring progress. So there's a lot of work that will come out of this, of starting to tackle your accessibility, and it will take time. So it's definitely worth tracking your progress over time, and not only to understand what progress you are making, but to present that internally so that the company can see where are you with your journey and how are you progressing towards that. So think about the kind of metrics that you might be able to track and report on. So reduction in the total number of accessibility issues, or increase in the compliance of the WCAG success criteria, or even just the number of accessibility related complaints has reduced over time as you're improving these different aspects. So that's the kind of like basic checklist. Next, I'll talk through 3 main stages that you'll probably go through, or we'd advise going through when you're identifying and preventing issues. So the first would be to conduct a full site audit. So identify all of the issues that exist on your site. Now, the first step in this would be to start thinking about what pages do you have on your site. So what are the different page templates you have, specific types of pages, and map out those different page templates. And also if you have specific components that are consistent across the site, start mapping all of these things out. So imagine you're an e-commerce site. You might have product pages, category pages, a shopping cart, checkout. You might also have things like a header, navigation, carousels, these different components. Start mapping all of these out. And once you've got that list, you can decide how you're going to test them. So this is where there's a question of, do you go for a sampling approach, or do you go for a scale testing at scale? So a lot of teams use the sample approach, which is essentially you've defined all of those different page templates. Pull out a couple of example URLs for each of those templates, and then you can test all of those URLs one at a time. So then you've got this kind of representative sample of like the main templates on your site, and you can check them manually. So there's some good extensions, free browser extensions that you can use, like Start plugin or Axe DevTools, that you can check one URL at a time, and it'll give you the issues that exist on that URL. And you can start mapping all of that out and log it in a spreadsheet. By the end of that, you'll have a list of all of the issues that you need to fix based on those URLs. So Some teams are happy that they've covered their bases with this. It's probably the cheapest option when it comes to auditing the site, but it's very manual and it's very time consuming to do all of this on URL at a time. And it does leave some room for missed issues. So for anyone that's worked with websites, you'll know it's not always as clear cut and nicely structured as you'd expect it to be. Someone's hacked the CMS somehow to add something to a page, a specific page that they needed to have, or something's been injected via JavaScript and it's not part of the normal template, but it is on this page. So there are a load of ways that people hack their way around page templates and introduce issues that wouldn't be template wide. There's all kinds of issues. Like, you've inherited an old site that's built on like a load of different things, and people have forgotten about a whole section of the site they don't know exists. There's all sorts of things that can come up that we've seen. So the other approach would be looking at testing at scale. So if you want to kind of save a lot of time and reduce the risk and build some confidence that you have checked everything, you can use an automated testing platform to test at scale. So something like Lumar provides allows you to essentially run a crawl and test every single URL that we crawl on your site and apply accessibility tests to those. So benefit of platforms like these as well is generally they'll keep track of those issues for you, so you can monitor progress over time, and you can visualize that for internal reporting purposes as well. So that's your accumulation of all the issues. You now know all of the issues that exist on the site. And next is prioritizing those issues. So this will mean different things to different organizations. And maybe this would be a good question for the end to talk about how is best to prioritize. But you essentially have to choose of this huge list of issues that you have, how are you going to approach them? How are you going to get the maximum impact for the effort that you put in? So once you've conducted your audit, the next stage is really figuring out how you're going to keep on top of new issues that appear on the site. So it's not a kind of one and done, you've done your audit and you can forget about your accessibility issues. There will be new issues introduced. Given that websites are very complex ecosystems, there are hundreds of different people touching them at any one time. You might have like dozens of development teams just working on one site, including like content creators and a bunch of different things. You can't possibly be aware of all the issues that are being introduced, or even all the changes that are happening. So having a monitoring system where you've got this regular check to identify any new issues is going to be important in catching new issues as they arise. I'd love to tell you that if you have like 100 content creators, they all are thinking about accessibility and they're going to make sure that they've got alt text on their images and they're thinking about color and they're using the correct headings and things. Not to pick on content teams, but the chances are that they probably aren't, because the knowledge is just not there. It's not as widely distributed as it should be. So having a monitoring system can enable you to identify these issues as they happen. And then finally, the next step in maturity would be to prevent any issues from even making it onto the live site. So embed accessibility testing into your website development process. So developers are already doing this as they're developing features, they're developing new pages, whatever it might be that they're building. They do different types of tests at each stages before they push it into the live environment to make sure they're not introducing any issues. So what you can do is apply accessibility tests to this process and basically ensure that you're not introducing any new issues. So test in pre-production, and if you identify any issues, it's much cheaper and efficient to fix it at this stage before you push it to the live site, than it would be to push the issue live. You have to identify it, you have to raise a bug ticket, you have to prioritize that bug ticket against other work, and so on. So embedding it into this development process really prevents new issues from being introduced and frees up your development time to work on other things. So those are the 3 stages. We've kind of talked about the issues, some of the common issues that you might come into, identifying them, preventing them. Next, Paul is going to talk about the actual impact of fixing those issues. What's the impact to users? Before we get to that, sorry, Paul.
Oh, sorry.
We've got one final question, poll question, which is, what's the most significant accessibility challenge in your team right now? So the options are leadership awareness support, issue identification, issue remediation, or other. If other, just stick it in the chat. Right, so we got a clear winner here. 56% say the most significant challenge is leadership awareness and support, followed by actual issue remediation, which is interesting. I've just seen attitudinal barriers come into the chat. Brilliant. So, Paul, the impact of accessibility improvements.
Yeah, so there's various things we can talk about here, but I'm going to touch on compliance, which is a lot of what people go ahead and try to reach a level of compliance. So that's where you've done your audits, you remediated all of your issues, and beautiful, right? You found no more issues. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of news, but compliance is not the same as a good experience when it comes to accessibility. It's actually quite possible to create a fully compliant experience where people with assistive technology are still going to struggle, either from the layout is confusing, there's assumed knowledge about the platform, maybe there's some cognitive issues. The bottom line is that the goal is what we need to look at for accessibility, the why behind accessibility. So I'll give you some little cases just that even happened in my life, like on this call, for example. So I try to read little notes with my screen reader as we're talking, and while we're talking, I can also hear the chat coming in, and it's talking to me while my screen reader is talking to me about my next point that I should raise, and while I'm also speaking at the same time. So we got a lot of information that's converging into one individual. That's where we have to think about that same type of concept when we're designing our website. So we're compliant, that's great, but are we overwhelming the person? Are we ensuring that we're providing plenty of opportunity for them to accomplish their tasks? There's a lot that goes into this world that we speak of. Something that I also wanted to tack on there, while you're working on your accessibility, it's really, really important that you give people that use assistive tech a path to talk to someone about the problems they're having. And consider that the individual that's doing that reach out has no knowledge of a WCAG. They don't know what ARIA is. They don't know about the standards, the laws. They don't know anything about this. All they know is that they're having a really, really hard time engaging with your product. So there should be on your web property or mobile app an accessibility statement, and that accessibility statement should have a path where that person can report issues, and that goes back to who's responsible inside your organization. There needs to be somebody on the other end. I'll give you another for instance for this. In my last wanderings around the web over the last maybe week or two, I have reached out to no less than 3 or 4 different companies from a personal perspective where I'm struggling with their website. They all have an email address where you can report accessibility issues because they're trying to click the compliance box, but their website's still broken. I've reached out to them. Only 1 out of 4 have reached back out to me to ask how they can help. Which one of those 4 do you think I'm going to be most inclined to talk to and use their services going forward? It's pragmatic, right? This is where the business case comes in. There are people that have alternative modalities in their life. They want to interact with your product. I submit that it's not a good thing for the business to exclude people just on the grounds that they may have something going on in their lives that prevents them from being able to interact in what many people might call the normal way. So I do want to have us think outside of the box as a group, understand that all of us have our own life situations. And if we can try to project our own empathy a little bit into this situation, that's where we're going to be able to create a better experience for everyone. So I don't want to go too deep on that, but it's really critical that we are thinking inclusively and that we're not just going to try and tick the box of compliance, because at the end of the day, the purpose, the reason, the why behind compliance is that those are just really a foundation and a rule set that is there to try to make a web property or a mobile application usable for individuals. So if we're just going to try and tick the box for compliance, we're literally just trying to do the bare minimum. It's critical, in my opinion, as a blind person, that we go to the usability level, that we give people a good experience when they're trying to interact. So that's really what I wanted to cover in this section. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'm just going to pause there and hand it back and see what questions we have to address.
I think you might be on mute there.
Classic.
Yeah, it sure is.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I feel like a lot of emphasis put on the issues themselves, the fixing the issues that exist, but really it's about think about the end user's experience in this. That often gets overlooked. So thank you for sharing. So we are running thin on time for the Q&A. But we've had a question come through on how easy are monitoring systems to set up and embed testing. Monitoring systems can be very easy to set up. It's just a case of configuring frequency and what you want to test and what you want to be alerted to. Embedding testing is a bit more of an involved process, since you have to essentially define the requirements, work with developers on what their existing flow is. You can integrate it with their systems, but obviously that takes a bit more time, and there's a bit more kind of negotiation, internal politics to get that to happen. It's very worthwhile once you get it done. But again, it can be done relatively simply. It's just a bit more involved. Another question, I guess to wrap up, would be maybe a lightning round for Clyde or Paul. Are there certain issues, certain types of issues that you should prioritize fixing first?
You want to jump in, Paul?
So
yeah, go ahead.
I do. So there are various things, but some of the obvious ones, and these are some of the easiest things to fix, is focus your attention on keyboard navigation. If you can get keyboard navigation working well, then you'll end up with a relatively usable experience. So we're looking for keyboard traps. We're looking for things that you can't access with the keyboard. That's something that developers can easily desk check just by using the tab key and caret browsing inside the browser. So certainly focus initial efforts on those keyboard nav bugs. They're going to be some of the top level things that you can get resolved.
Thanks, Paul. We, I think, unfortunately, have run out of time. We've still got a couple of questions coming through. So we've got a couple of final things here. Just want to thank everyone for for joining. We've got a digital accessibility starter kit here from QualityLogic that we're linking through that everyone can access. We've got a link to our blog. And if you'd like to get in touch to either learn more or request a demo for some of the functionality, then please do get in touch. And we've got a request to share the slides. We'll pass this on. And as I said, the recording will be live in a couple of days on our YouTube channel. But thank you so much for everyone for joining. Hopefully this was really helpful. I know I've learned some things today as well. So thank you all and see you on the next one.